English. Apparently this isn't working.
Yes.
Ah. Okay, so I'll be working like this, I guess. Let's start. My name is Nick. I'm very glad to be here on this stage finally. It's been like years since I've wanted to be here. Since usually a very big crowd attends this meetup. So I'm glad to see you guys here. I'm going to be talking about CSS-in-JS, some of the stuff that Idan showed here just a few moments ago, and a whole lot more. So a little bit about myself. This is me, this is my family. I have almost a decade of web development experience. And it's actually a very exciting time for me and my family because as of a month from now, we're going to become digital nomads and be basically homeless, and I will try to somehow financially make it work. So nothing heavyweight there, no responsibility. You can follow me and stuff like that. Let's start. So first a disclaimer. I love CSS, and sadly, I know in person only one guy who actually knows it better than me. That's a shame. I wish more people knew CSS. I've worked on content sites and third-party widgets hosted on other sites and single-page applications, client-side, isomorphic. I've had to integrate all of the above to play nice, which is harder than it should be. And this is not a what CSS sucks kind of talk. I am merely suggesting new technologies, not a replacement for CSS. And it's all about new tools in your toolbox. Okay? I'm not suggesting to replace CSS. CSS is here to stay. It's part of what I'm going to cover. But now you have more options to solve problems that we've had to deal with for a while. And that's an important one. I haven't actually used most of these, okay? So accept this as purely theoretical, or I don't know, but some people use it, and my message here is to try and use these tools for yourselves and draw your own conclusions. And what I have been, apart from working with CSS for a long time, is a heavyweight user of Sass for like 5 years, I think, and I love it, but it has its problems, like any technology. And let's see what I want to talk about. So, 2 examples of CSS ecosystem failure. Why it's like that. The long history in front-end terms, it's like 30 years of CSS-in-JS. Correlation, I will draw a correlation to the evolution of modern HTML authoring. How CSS-in-JS solves the CSS ecosystem deficiencies, what it can do more than that. What value does it give us beyond just bringing it into the current age? And examples of popular CSS-in-JS libraries with React integration. So let's start. And this looks promising, doesn't it? Not threatening at all. How many of you have seen this image? I'm pretty sure, yeah, a lot. So the trouble with CSS is actually not this, or the main trouble is not this. The main trouble with CSS is when you have a new idea and a project that you want to start. You have a solid plan. You start a new project. You add CSS reset or normalize. You do a bunch of stuff, and then you profit, right? Sounds easy? Not when we get into the implementation. So what we can do is you use a simple link element to a hard-coded CDN CSS file, which is not following best practices because it's another request. It's not an actual package that you manage, and you cannot self-host it if you need to. Another option that you have is to copy-paste the CSS reset into your CSS. But you're going to have a bad time managing that too. And the current popular choice is to use complex tooling to achieve something which is fundamentally so basic. This should not be this difficult. And even that has a lot of gotchas. CSS packages in NPM are scarce and inconsistent and have a lot of problems, which I will cover later. So that's not a good place to be in. So why is it so damn difficult? CSS workflow is stuck in document mode. It is not modular, not interoperable, not scopable. And optimizations aren't built in. You have to work hard to make these things work. And I love quotes, and I mostly agree with this quote. So this is another example. This is a real post from like 3 weeks ago to JavaScript Israel Facebook group. It's a friend of mine, a smart guy who works at Red Hat, and he's asking a very legitimate and simple question. How do I reuse styling of an existing component from another runtime? And this is another quote, which is also mostly correct. Don't read it. It's a good idea turned into a bad implementation, like the US elections. I wish I had something better to tell this friend of mine whose main job isn't front end, but I couldn't. I gave him bad advice. I had no choice. So this is very frustrating and disappointing. Why can't we easily reuse CSS? And that's because modern CSS frameworks aren't interoperable. Each is like a country. It has its own language, concepts, conventions. They support different browsers, different generations. It's like islands of functionality, but you can't really mix and match. This results in incompatible monoliths, negating basic software development best practices, code sharing, modularity, code reuse, and huge variance in how the same features are implemented. As a trivial example, take ClearFix. There are like 8 different versions of how to do that, and you basically copy-paste the first one you see online, and you just append it to your style sheet, and then you cry. As you can see, the climate is really getting warmer. This is news from 1958. It's right over here. I'm not sure this is real news and not fake news, but it's certainly old news. Directly from the documentation of Fella, a CSS-in-JS library. Who here has seen this slide? Who can recognize it? Okay. Well, in November 2014, 30 years ago in front-end time, Christopher Shadow, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who was working on React and React Native at Facebook, gave a thought-provoking talk titled CSS-in-JS. He outlined the problems of CSS at scale and later showed how they solved those at Facebook. They were able to solve most, but in return had to add a lot of additional tooling. They didn't solve all problems. Then he introduced a complete new approach to handle those issues without any actual extra work, using inline styles. It seemed crazy, but it worked magically. Shock, stuff, the front-end community, the CSS community, the HTML people, they were all running wild, and like these are real tweets by well-known people in the industry, quoting, "Is this a joke? Don't repeat the mistakes of the past." Worst web dev idea of all time, or just a really bad one? So many things to avoid writing CSS. So this is a neat graph of the evolution of the web, starting with 1991. As you can see, it's very simple, linear, and has very few technologies. So it's all about best practices, which are there for good reasons. But times are changing. And yesterday's best practices stop being best because they fail to serve their purpose. And that's because the purpose has changed. So this is how the internet used to look like. And the terms were web pages and information superhighway, which is funny today, but content consumption was the main activity, and websites were sites, and pages, not applications. And so you had this thing, you had these clear layers which separated concerns of content, presentation, and then interactivity and progressive enhancement. Nowadays, we have components. This is the documentation of material design components. Usually, had I had a wider screen here, you'd see more of it, but never mind. So modern separation of concerns. This is how it looks like on the right. You want to talk about features. You want to talk about functionalities. You do not care about style sheets or the language in which your functionality is written. You care about what it does and how you can compose those building blocks to make something that works. Okay, these are applications built from small building blocks. You want to talk about buttons and layouts and pans and sidebars and headlines and widgets. You know, there's a lot of names for the same thing. And this is how evolution looks like. So CSS-in-JS today is catching up with a decade of HTML-in-JS evolution. And if you don't know this term, I made it up, and I'll prove it. So remember jQuery plugins from 10 years ago? This used to make, or actually some people still use this, it makes a neat select, which is really a better user experience than just a select. So this is HTML-in-JS 0.1. Now, this is more like how evolution looks like, actually. It is not linear, and we make a lot of mistakes on the way to get to where we are. And I'm not claiming we're at the end of the road for CSS-in-JS, but we've seen some stuff. And the same goes for HTML-in-JS. So remember single-page application frameworks and template, string concatenation templating languages? Stuff like Pug, Mustache, Handlebars. You know, there used to be a website where there was a wizard where you could select your templating language based on all sorts of criteria. This was HTML-in-JS 0.2. And nowadays, we have modern components. So this is actually HTML-in-JS 1.0, or at least I think so. Now, I couldn't resist, but this needs to be deleted from the video, okay? I'm sorry. So who here remembers this show from like 20 years ago, 15, from the 90s? This is Beekman's World. It's a TV show that I grew up watching. It's a Canadian show, and it used to be aired here in Israel. It's a show for kids where these guys did all sorts of scientific experiments to teach science, and they loved it. So now we're running experiments resulting in CSS-in-JS fatigue. But that's a great thing, actually, because we acknowledge CSS's shortcomings in the modern web. And smart people are coming up with new approaches to tackle these problems all the time, as you've just witnessed 15 minutes ago. This is how it looks like. Smart people experimenting. So the premise of CSS-in-JS isn't just catching up to modern front end, but it's much more than that. So first of all, what do you get today? You replace global namespace, a lack of isolation, and non-deterministic resolution with scoped styles. Not as a best practice, which must be enforced using conventions like BEM or object-oriented CSS or SMAX, all sorts of ways. And you know, you have to police them. You have to add tooling to say, oh no, you didn't name these selectors and these elements like that. It's not according to our convention because it's important. And it is important, but it's annoying. But the default, a lack of dependency management and operability is replaced by simply JavaScript. We have pretty nice tooling in JavaScript. You can use modules and NPM, and you have the whole power of a general purpose programming language like JavaScript to compose and do whatever you want with styling. And the wet dream of every web developer since ages ago, sharing values between JavaScript and CSS, you have that built in by definition. But the real premise of CSS-in-JS is reimagining what's possible compared to plain old CSS. So you can have, again, today, optimizations and static analysis resulting in dead code elimination, code coverage, and testing of CSS, not by taking screenshots, not manual QA or whatever. You can do this programmatically. You can run regression testing. You can do all sorts of magic. You can inline critical CSS above the fold, which has always been something complex and error-prone because you had to do that manually. You can have uber optimizations, because when you author your HTML in JavaScript and your CSS in JavaScript in the same runtime, the two are coupled. And you get super magnification with name mangling like we've had in JavaScript for years. And you can have stuff like Webpack's common chunks plugin, which extracts the common parts of different styles automatically for you and places it in different files, a different chunk. Which again, you could do that, but manually, which is why nobody usually bothers. You can have standardization and modularity and actually have real code reuse. So you can have standard libraries instead of the current CSS silos, stuff from SASLand and Lodash for CSS. The possibilities are really endless. You can have real CSS component packages, real styling which you can reuse no matter in which framework or runtime your application is written. But wait, there's more. Are you ready for the next best thing since sliced bread? This is it.
Take my money.
You can have today non-browser styling. So you have React Native Style Sheet API. And on top of that, you can have, again, today, okay, the list is longer than this by large and well-known industry leaders. Companies like Microsoft and Airbnb and PayPal are working on this and using this in their production environments. Today, you can actually write styles which are cross-platform. This is the premise of Java, of write once, run anywhere. You have stuff like Yoga, which is a cross-platform layout engine for JavaScript, Java, C#, Objective-C, and C. You can have crazy stuff, which you couldn't even have imagined a few years ago, like custom renderers, such as React Sketch app, which renders React components inside Sketch. And another thing that I've seen recently is there's an experimental renderer of style sheets into an SVG image, so you can actually, forget it. I don't remember the details, but it's cool. I can show it later. Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. So let's do a showcase of some popular CSS-in-JS libraries. And we love React because its component model and API make an excellent DOM abstraction. And guess what? The same applies to CSS abstractions. The two play very well together. And the first example is CSS Modules. Who here has used CSS Modules? Okay, some people have, so have I. Actually, this is the only library from the showcase that I have used. And let's see some examples. So you have an input CSS file, your regular CSS. You import your class names into your component, and then you basically compose your style name in runtime, and then you use it like this. Easy. The output is you get actually scoped styling, which is where the selectors are file class random. You can add a bunch of stuff there as well, and you get this HTML. So these are scoped to that, and that's about where CSS Modules. And I am aware of the fact that they have a few more features, but I haven't actually seen anyone using them. But this is popular. So let's talk about React. You have babel-plugin-react-css-modules. It does everything for you and adds another 10% plus 2K to your runtime. You do not need camel case names, and you can have a clear distinction between global CSS and CSS modules using different props. So you use a class name for global CSS, class name, and style name for local module styling. And this is how you do it. You import the whole style sheet, and then you just use strings. And you have the same thing. Now, I found this on the internet. Angular, Benji stole my joke, actually, or whatever it's called now, has a built-in implementation of something like CSS modules. I don't know the default, the details, but so I've heard, and it's enabled by default. And jokes aside, this is really awesome. This is progress. This is good. We should have scoped CSS by default. At least that's what I think. And the documentation for it, unlike that image, I was not able to find. I spent like 20 minutes Googling, and it was a nightmare. And then I asked friends who use Angular, and they pointed me to it. This is a link to it, if you can read that. To me it looks like Chinese, but this is how I feel after looking into Angular land. I want to clean myself. But I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. JSS. It is a fast JavaScript to CSS compiler and client and server side. It is non-opinionated and compatible with many libraries, including React. It is small and extensible via plugins, which is actually true for all CSS-in-JS runtimes. They all have cool things like post-CSS and minification and, media query grouping and all of that nice stuff. They all come with it because it's just JavaScript, so it's easy. So how does that work? Let's see. Mouse is working. It seems like everything fails today. Okay, I'll just do this. You import a bunch of stuff. Come on. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you import a bunch of stuff. You do this one-time setup. You create or compose your CSS. This one uses JavaScript objects. You can have CSS pseudo-classes. You can have everything that CSS has to offer, pseudo-elements. You can have media queries and all the stuff you love, but you can also use runtime JavaScript. So this is using a package, and this is happening at runtime. And then you basically attach your style sheet, and then you render your HTML with it. Pretty simple.
No caching.
And no, sorry?
That doesn't leverage caching, right?
What do you mean by caching?
Caching static assets.
Well, it's cached together with a component. Your JavaScript is tied to your styling. Now, reactjss is JSS on steroids. So you get all of JSS plus these benefits. First of all, it's lazy. So your style sheets are created and removed, unmount and unmount, which makes sense. Your styles and CSS object model are kept minimal due to laziness and because the only styles that are rendered are the ones for the components that are actually rendered. A single style sheet is shared between all elements, and you get nice tooling like React Loader. Let's see how this works. You import a bunch of stuff. You do basically the same thing which we've seen earlier, only here you also can receive props as an argument in your CSS functions. And you have your component, and well, that's it. You just use it. There's very little code. Now, you can also have reactjss with decorator syntax if you're into that. And it looks basically the same, only more concise because you have a decorator, which is nice. Style components. So why even bother with class names? Because if you think about it, it's just an implementation detail. You don't care about how they're called. If you don't have a cascade, if you scope your styles and your selectors anyways, if they're unique, then why even bother naming them? You don't care about that. All you care about is how it looks like. You care about this, the actual styling, not about selectors. So this is style components. You import an element, which is a function, from style components, okay, and you pass it an ES6 string literal, and you just use it because you get a component. So it's sort of like a factory-ish thing. Simple. Now I've mentioned interoperability. This is an example. So you can have style components together with JSS. So it's actually JSS with the API of style components. Style components can be invoked using either the previous example I showed with the string, or you can use JavaScript objects. Both work. And as you can see here, you have the object notation, the same function which receives props, and here you can also see composition. So we have this component called title, which is an H1 element with this styling. And you can create a scary title component, which is made of title, and it overrides some of the styling, which is very nice. And this is how you use it, okay? Note the lack of class names. You do not care about them. Aphrodite. So, I don't know, it looks very, very similar. You have a style sheet that you create. You have an object, which is a replacement for basically writing CSS and strings. You have the same stuff here, and this is how it looks like when you do server-side rendering with critical CSS inlining. You import some function, and you just render to string, and then you send it down the wire with your CSS inline. Simple. And these optimizations are this easy, they're this simple, okay? So if you do isomorphic, I would recommend to try some of these. And of course, JSS has an Aphrodite API too, plus a superset of its features. So next, styletron. This is an image from styletron's documentation, and what it shows you is 3 CSS rules, each pair of which shares a single property. I hope you can see these the colors, but basically you have the same height, the same font size, the same display, and usually in CSS land, this is the input and this is the output, and you use selectors to apply them, and you can't really optimize it. But using JavaScript, and when you create your HTML in JavaScript and CSS in JavaScript, the runtime does it for you, okay? So follow the errors, and you'll see that the runtime creates 3 distinct classes, each with a single unique property, and then it creates selectors which compose those classes, okay? This is an implementation detail. You don't care about it. And this is a crazy optimization which we've had in JavaScript, for example, for years. And this is not unique to styletron. Lots of CSS-in-JS runtimes do this. Styletron-react. I don't know, I'm not even going to bother. It just looks the same. You have your styles, your composition, your usage. Next. So using styletron-react on the client, you import a bunch of stuff, and if you do server-side rendering, then you want to rehydrate it on the client, because the whole, or part of the idea is that you do this at runtime. So this is how you do it. I don't know, it's very little code. Even if I don't understand what it does, it just works. It's simple. Server-side rendering, pretty much the same. You do the same stuff. You extract your critical CSS, and you inline it into the head element. Done. Now, this is another quote that I believe in. Not everything is perfect. And I don't think that CSS-in-JS is the keyword, the cure for world hunger and all of our problems as developers. Some of the things that some of the deficiencies are debugging and developer experience are lackluster. But the same is actually just as true for CSS preprocessors. So I can tell you that when using Sass, and you have functions and mixins and all sorts of crazy stuff which you can do in a pretty rich language, the source maps don't really tell you, don't draw the whole picture. But again, this is not going to be any worse in this case. In React, things are better since there are awesome dev tools. So because everything is props, you can just debug it. These concepts are still considered novel, experimental, and controversial by many, which is why I'm here to save the world. Client-side CSS-in-JS runtime incurs an overhead. Actually, not just client-side, but server-side too. The initial download and bootstrapping of the runtime obviously has a cost to it. You need to ship more bytes down the wire, the JavaScript runtime, and you need to initialize it. Okay, so you do get inlining, but later you need to actually connect it to your DOM, to your pre-rendered DOM. And subsequent processing obviously also has some costs. Hopefully it is mitigated by the Uber optimizations, which I have shown you guys earlier, because you have minimal CSS. Only the stuff that gets rendered is actually in the DOM, in the CSS object model. Now, after I've showed you all of that, what's my point? So, there's good news and there's bad news. So the good news is it's a celebration, and with so many choices, each with a variety of features and trade-offs, I have no idea which ones will become popular. You should try these for yourself and draw your own conclusions. You know, déjà vu. At least it feels like it to me. I hope it takes us less than HTML in JS to get to where we are. Who here remembers this image? This was popular back in the day, from the days of IE6, which was magical. Hmm? What? IE6. It's the same. ISIS is IE6. It shows the broken bugs in IE6. And the bad news is CSS is here to stay. I'll give you a moment to read this, this awesome tweet. You still have to learn CSS. And I think I'm pretty much done. This is another quote that I love. I would like to say thank you to all of these people and these publications. Some of these are talks and videos which you can watch. These are the smart guys who have come up with some of these frameworks and runtimes and articles. They have inspired me to do this talk. So Mark, for example, is the co-creator of CSS Modules. These are famous folks in JavaScript and CSS land. And all the credit goes to them. I just compiled and showed you guys all of this information overload. And thank you very much for your time. Hope you make CSS great again. Questions?
Yeah, so I have a question. As far as I know, most browsers don't even support scope style. In fact, I know that Chrome dropped support. So how does that work?
Well, it works by just generating unique selectors. Scope styles in CSS, you're right. It's a new feature in CSS now, and you do have that in Chrome and I think Firefox maybe.
As far as I know, only Firefox supported, and Chrome dropped support for scope style.
Okay. So the way that it's achieved is just by generating random unique selectors. It's a workaround, and hopefully when CSS has all of these features, we will not need this stuff, and we will be able to just do CSS. So what I'm suggesting here, by the way, is not a replacement for CSS. It's complementary to CSS and to what you can do using CSS today. Hopefully we'll just throw it all out when we have better native stuff.
So if it generates so many unique identifiers, doesn't that bloat your bundle eventually? Because you're copying so many, doesn't that increase the size of your payload?
Well, it does, but it's not a lot more. First of all, it's only the selectors. Second, usually the generated names are shorter than the names that you would have given them as a human. Plus, in the greater context of things, when you add gzipping, it's peanuts. It's nothing. It's the rules themselves that take that weigh more.
So, two things. One, we used JSS or a similar package that we sort of like forked and wrote for about a year. And what really beat us is the fact that once you have a lot of CSS in JavaScript, the time it takes for the objects to calculate the class names is actually pretty expensive. We noticed, I think, 400 millisecond slowdown when we used JSS. And then when we migrated to CSS modules, everything was fast. So just an advice, like be careful when you use these tools and like benchmark. Now about the file size, what we found is that with CSS modules, our CSS files actually got shorter because it can look for different elements in different places of the application that have the same style, and then reuse the same class name in production mode. Mm-hmm. So you actually get smaller styles because if you have like an H1 element with the color red, and then you have like a title element with the color red, it will take those and use a single class name. So it actually saves space.
Yeah, it's
Then how do you debug?
It's this.
Well, in debug mode, everything is super debuggable. In production, you have to use source maps and then debug mode and all that, and it's a pain. But you only pay for it in production.
Yeah, obviously it's not for free, and there are trade-offs like with any technology. I'm not saying this is, it'll change everything, or maybe it will, but not yet. Test what you do, what you try. Yeah.
Why do you think people love to hate JavaScript and CSS so much?
Why do I think people love to hate CSS? Well, I think the root cause is people I think there are two causes. The main one is people don't actually bother learning CSS in depth. What I've seen, and it's very unfortunate, is that a lot of people, like, they actively try to avoid actually learning CSS, which is a real shame because how would you get better by avoiding learning it? They try to invest the bare minimum effort to actually to solve their current problem without actually understanding how, and the result is appropriate. And two is because what we do today on the web is not what we used to do. The cascading part of cascading style sheets used to make a whole lot of sense, and today for most applications, for most use cases, just is actually an unfeature. You do not want it for most things nowadays, for applications. You want it for content sites. And so that design decision is just not right for the modern web, I would say. That's at least what I think.
It's not coding. Yeah, that's it.
It's not what?
Coding, it's not real coding. It's declarative.
Well, declarative is also programming, but it's a different style, and a lot of people don't bother to actually learn it properly. Yeah.
יש שתי שאלות, אני שאלתי עברית, אבל תרגיש חופשי לענות לאנגלית. אחד, האם הקלאסים מלמעלה מחלחלים פנימה? זאת אומרת, אם יש לי פונט, וזה ברמת האפ, זאת אומרת, אני אינקפסולייטד בתוך האפ הכי גבוה שלי, בסדר? root element. זה מחלחל פנימה, עד שלא ידרסו אותו, כמו...
זה קסקייד, לא, זה לא.
זה לא?
אלא אם אתה...
כל אלמנט צריך עכשיו לשנות את הפונט.
לא,
אם זה?
נראה שהוא מבין את השאלה שלך בצורה אחת, ונראה שדיברנו על זה כבר, אז מבין את השאלה שלך. השאלה זה, אם נגיד שמתי, יש לי דיב למעלה ושמתי עליו פונט סייז, ויש לי נגיד דיב למטה, וזה סקופט לכאן, אז כן, אז הבחור למטה יקבל את זה, אבל אנשים אחרים בצד לא יקבלו, כאילו זה לא...
מה זה אחרים?
בגלל inherit של CSS,
נכון.
בגלל הקסקייד.
נכון.
עוד פעם, אני לא הבנתי.
נכון, נכון.
גם בפרופרטיז ממשיכים לעבוד אותו דבר. קלאסס עובדים בצורה שונה. אוקיי? כאילו פונט סייז זה משהו שפשוט חוזר.
אוקיי, אז זה כן
נכון, כן, כן, כן.
CSS הוא אותו CSS.
אוקיי.
פשוט קל לך להגדיר אותו בדיוק מתחת, וזהו, סיימת.
סבבה. ועכשיו דווקא מהצד השני, מה קורה אם אני רוצה לאפשר למישהו, בוא נגיד שכתבתי ספרייה של דייט פיקר, ואני רוצה לאפשר לאנשים שמשתמשים בה לשנות את הסטיילינג שלה. פעם זה היה קל, היינו משנים פשוט מוסיפים עוד CSS אחרי, ודורסים את הקלאסים של הספרייה. ועכשיו אם זה אינקפסולטד בתוך הדייט פיקר, אז איך אתה יכול כאילו מבחוץ, שזה לא בפרופס, זה JavaScript.
כזה?
לא, אז פה אני צריך להעביר פרופס מבחוץ, דרך React, דרך JavaScript,
אוקיי.
פנימה.
אוקיי, הבנתי.
אני שואל...
כל הרעיון זה שאתה עושה את זה דרך JavaScript. ה-API שלך זה JavaScript, כולל המראה של זה, כולל הסטייל.
ובמילים אחרות אתה לא רוצה לעשות את
כן, אבל אז זה לא באמת...
אתה מדבר על סים? אתה יכול להגיד לי
כן,
כמו...
למשל.
אז יש
אתה
גם
קורא את הסים איפה שאתה
תימינג,
צריך.
יש גם טולינג לרוב ה-CSS-in-JS runtimes, יש גם פלאגינים ואקסטנשנים בגלל שהם אקסטנסיביליים, שמאפשרים בדיוק את זה, דברים כמו תימינג.
רגע, אני לא בטוח שאלה את השאלה, כי בסופו של דבר יש לך קומפוננטה, ואתה רוצה שיהיה לה תים אחר בהתאם נגיד דייט פיקר. אז כשאתה מדבר קומפוננטה שהיא יוזבל בריאקט, אתה מפרסם אותה, בדרך כלל ידע תקבל קלאסנים ודברים כאלה, ועדיין מישהו יכול להגדיר בחוץ קלאסנים ודברים כאלה. כן, צריך להגדיר, כמו שאתה עושה כשאתה מגדיר קומפוננט נגיד, לא יודע, ב-jQuery, איך עושים פילים לדברים שהם נסטים. גם ב-jQuery שהיה לך נגיד קומפוננט של דייט פיקר, אז הוא הולך לדרוס את הקלאס הזה, הזה והזה, ופה כשאתה יקבל את זה בתור פרופ, יהיה לך פרופ שנגיד כאילו סטייל של הדייט, סטייל של הזה, כאילו זה אפשרי.
אז זו הדרך לעשות את זה פה.
לא, ובדרך כלל, כאילו כשאנחנו לפחות עבדנו עם זה, אני לא יכול לדבר בשביל זה, אז יש לנו סטייל אחד שהוא גלובלי. שכאילו יש לך סטייל גלובלי, ואז כל הקומפוננטים מקבלות סטיילים ספציפיים שלהם שהם סקופ.
זהו, זו השאלה. אם אני רוצה עדיין לעבוד עם בוטסטראפ או אמור CSS גלובלי אחר.
אם אתה תומך ב-i9 אין לך מה לעבוד עם בוטסטראפ, יש לך פלקס, אבל כאילו... נגיד, אתה ממש רוצה לעבוד עם בוטסטראפ?
בוטסטראפ 4 זה פלקס.
בסדר, אז מה עושה בשביל? אבל אם אתה רוצה לעבוד עם בוטסטראפ, אתה יכול, אין שום בעיה. תקלו את בוטסטראפ, וכל מיני תתחילו פשוט עם סטיילים של בוטסטראפ.
אם אפשר להתערב רק, התקן האחרון של קלאסניים זה יוניקים, נקרא ICSS, מאפשר, אני לא זוכר בדיוק את ה-implementation details, אבל מאפשר לך לעשות דריסה jQuery day style על ידי import. כאילו אתה מגדיר את הקשר בין שני קבצים, ואז לשניהם יהיה את ה-unique name, ואז אתה תוכל לדרוס אותם בקלות. ואני יודע שזה גם CSS Modules.
לא, כן, CSS Modules עושה את זה. אם אני רוצה להוסיף משהו לקלאס הזה, אני יכול לעשות import לקלאס name הזה ולדרוס עליו.
כך שאם יש לך קומפוננט ה-day picker, ויש לך day picker CSS, אז אתה יכול להביא את ה-day picker CSS בתוך ה-package, וזה...
אני אדרוס את הישירות ככה.
כן.
אחלה.